I'm Renee Charles with the Heartland Partnership alongside Steve Jaeger, who's the Executive Director of Transport. And we want to talk about transportation, and you are the guy who has all the information for us. So we want to bring you in and kind of get your perspective on things. And the first thing I want to know is, what's the hardest hit industry within the transportation sector?
Well, the transportation sector is feeling the effects of the economic downturn. There's no question about that, particularly in the consumer goods area. Probably the hardest hit segment of the transportation industry now is motor carriage, trucking. That's due to a number of things. First of all, the imports of consumer goods from Asia in particular is down. Therefore, that's generating fewer loads from the various rail terminals for delivery to local businesses. Christmas merchandise was down, and since the Christmas holidays, overall import merchandise is down about maybe 15 to 16%. Trucking feels the brunt of that. Now, the railroads are also big players in that area, but they have other business they can fall back on.
And tell me a little bit more about the rail industry. I mean, it is, I know Galesburg nearby, huge railroad hub there, so it has a major impact on our region.
And even Peoria, because Peoria is served by no fewer than 5 of the Class 1 railroads. There's only 7 major systems, and we have 5 of them actually coming into the Peoria area. So
People may not realize that.
They may not realize it. These are all freight railroads, and they all have their various business niches, and their foundation of business is primarily manufacturing that is sourced in this area. That manufacturing, of course, has taken some hits as well, and that's reduced some carloads for the railroads. But for the most part, the railroads do have other business to fall back on. The railroad industry is healthy ever since it was deregulated. A lot of people probably don't realize how prosperous the freight railroad industry has actually been for a couple of decades now. So they can continue their capital improvement programs, their expansions, in their capacity initiatives, even as revenues are down. And they have business such as coal and agricultural products, which are going to move in all times, even bad times. Coal has to be moved in order to supply the power plants. Exactly.
Okay. What about the barge industry? I mean, barge traffic. We see it up and down the Illinois River. How is that industry doing?
The waterways transportation infrastructure is probably the least affected by the downturn, and that's because the commodities that are handled by barge tend to be very base commodities in bulk, which really haven't been impacted that badly. Grain is among the leaders here, and particularly in this economy here, which is very agricultural in nature. You have wheat, corn, sorghum, and various other types of grains which are moving out of local elevators on the Illinois waterway. They're moving primarily to export elevators in the south on the lower Mississippi River, and their business is actually only down about 3%. The only commodities that are really hurting for inland waterways transportation are the movement of construction materials, because obviously home building and overall construction is down, and that's where it's felt. But by and large, the river is still a relatively prosperous place and a good place to work.
And the river is a huge piece of our local economy. So when we do feel a pinch, again, people probably don't realize that a pinch in transportation along the river can really make an impact on our community.
It really can, and so far, because it's holding up relatively well, we've not seen a whole lot of job losses. The crewing of the various barge lines that move barges up and down the river remains pretty stable. Traffic bases are still somewhat imbalanced, and there's mostly agricultural goods moving southward out of the area, and a lot of empty barges coming back up here. We'd like to fill those empty barges, but there's not as much northbound business as there is southbound. But that's an issue even in the best of times.
All right. Well, Steve Jaeger, thanks so much for joining us
today and
giving us that insight.